Hey everybody, it's Alex here to talk about Final Fantasy Explorers, which I've been playing for a little bit now, a little bit in preview stage and a little bit of the final version. There will be a text review on the site from Simon, but I figured we'd do a quick video here, just me talking about what I think about the game in a sort of reviewy format. So, the obvious thing to bring up here is what type of game this is, and I think the comparison you're going to see most people making in reviews and stuff is that this is a Monster Hunter style game, which is true. The core of the game, essentially the core loop of it, is you are in town, you pick a mission, you go up on that mission. Usually the goal of that mission is to kill a very specific big beast of some description, and then you head back to town and pick up your rewards, and you repeat. And the game is obviously designed with cooperative play in mind also, so you can bring in up to 3 other players either over the internet or locally via wireless and head on in with varying classes and stuff like that. A party setup in a true Final Fantasy style that'll allow you to properly exploit the weaknesses of an enemy. I think the core loop of this game works quite well. I think the combat feels good. The way the combat works is you assign moves to each of the face buttons, but then you can adjust between 2 different sets of moves with the L and R triggers. So what that means is if you hold R, you have a different set of moves on A, B, X, Y than you do if you're holding L. So that actually means you're taking in 8 moves, and then there's of course equipment and all that other stuff as well. One thing that I found really pleasant about this game is the marketing has harped on really hard about this, including the classic Final Fantasy characters that you can summon in to help you, so you can play as Lightning and Cloud and people like that. But the nice thing is that actually isn't the core of this game. I wonder if they focused on that for marketing because they didn't think they'd be able to fully explain the core. The core of it really is that Monster Hunter style thing. It doesn't actually rely on that fan service too much, and that's something that I can actually really get behind and support. Because if I'm entirely honest, I do think Square Enix has often relied on fan service too much, but Explorers is absolutely its own game. In terms of the rest of the Final Fantasy series, it has most similarities with, I would say, Crystal Chronicles, with the cooperative focus and even the art style, which is from the same person. But because this is still doing its Monster Hunter take, that actually means it is still significantly different to those games. In terms of versus Monster Hunter, this is a slimmed down, pared back take on that series. I think Square realises that Final Fantasy is a series that has a lot more mainstream appeal, a lot broader appeal than something like Monster Hunter or many other Japanese RPGs in the West. And so as a result, this game tries that formula, but it tries to keep it a little bit more simple, a tiny bit more easy to approach. Now, if you're a Monster Hunter nutcase, if you love that series, that means you're probably going to find this a bit simplistic. You're going to look at it and chances are you are actually going to say no thanks. However, if you're not, very different scenario, just in that you can approach this, it feels like a Final Fantasy game. It will let you try that Monster Hunter formula, but it doesn't throw you in at the deep end quite so much. Now, there are issues. I have a big issue with, for instance, the camera in the main hub area. It's a sort of locked camera that changes angle when you move into certain areas of the town, and it is just pretty poor. And generally speaking, I think this game has a problem, much like Monster Hunter, in that when you're alone, it simply is not as good. However, when you can get together with other people, as I've been lucky enough to do with some other people who had the game ahead of time, you can have a hell of a lot of fun. When you're picking classes and spells and all that sort of stuff, if you're synergizing with your teammates, it becomes a really fun thing. Obviously, 3DS isn't necessarily the best platform for this. You can't do voice chat very easily and all that sort of stuff. But especially if you can get people in the same room, it turns into something that's a little bit magical. There's a solid effort to sort of bridge the gap between the story-light approach many games of this style take and a story-heavy approach which people expect from Final Fantasy. And that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, to be honest with you. But the important thing is, the story they do add doesn't impact the mission structure. This is a very handheld-friendly game in the respect that the missions you get don't last that long, except for the larger bosses, which are more like raid bosses. And the great thing about those is they're really difficult and they're really challenging, and at the end of them you'll find yourself sort of having a bit of a euphoric high because you managed to beat them. They're even better, when you've got other people, because that means you're shouting at them, oh, she's charging up an attack, she's doing this, and so on and so forth, which really adds to the tension. you know, that's where this game truly shines. It's in the co-op play. The other stuff, the fan service, all that sort of thing, all fine, all serviceable. It's a fun RPG, and if you like juggling jobs and classes and what moves you're going to take into battle with you in an action RPG sort of setting, this is definitely a good way to spend some time in bite-sized sessions. It's the perfect sort of commute game, for instance. I want to take a moment to shout out the art style as well, which has a more, you know, cutesy style than Final Fantasy typically has now. You know, it's similar, as I said, to Final Fantasy IX or Crystal Chronicles, and I think it looks absolutely gorgeous. The 3DS hardware, you know, it's at the end of its lifetime now. It's extremely aged at this point. But this game looks pretty good, I feel. The areas that they have are modest in size, and you will find that there are multiple zones to missions often. You'll start somewhere, and you will load from zone to zone. But the load times are quite short, and the visuals are pretty good looking as well. And I really enjoy, actually, how good characters like Cloud and Squall and Lightning, who you don't typically see in this art style, look in this art style. I think it actually really suits them. So there you go. I have to shout that out, because as a big Final Fantasy IX fan, I do love visuals like this. As I said earlier, there will be a full text review over on rpgsite.net with much more detail about the various gameplay systems and stuff, if that's the sort of info you wanted. But I just wanted to give a quick overarching view of what my viewpoint is on this game. I think it's a solid thing. Would I recommend it? If you're a fan of this type of game, as long as you're okay with the fact that this one is a more simple take on it, then yes, 100% recommend it. If you've tried Monster Hunter, or looked at Monster Hunter and just thought it a bit too daunting, or you wanted more character and more familiarity with the art and the monsters and stuff like that, this is perfect for you if you're a Final Fantasy fan, because it's all those things. It has the monsters and things you'll recognise, and it has that Monster Hunter gameplay, so it's a solid mix there. All of this has to just be taken with the caveat that there just isn't quite as much depth there as there is with some other games of this type. And I think if you're okay with that and you're just looking for something to kill some time with, this is actually a really, really nice handheld experience. Definitely wouldn't hold up so well on console, but I definitely do recommend it, and I fully intend to continue playing it myself, as long as I can get people together to play it with. That's the other big caveat. Do you have people who will play it with you? That will make a huge difference. But on the whole, I really, really enjoyed Final Fantasy Explorers. I think it's a cracking little take on that type of combat and that type of gameplay, and it straddles the line really well between Final Fantasy and making it feel like Final Fantasy by having a little bit of fan service and flashbacks and things you're familiar with, and by having its own original tone, which is something I think a lot of Final Fantasy hasn't been too good at lately. It's been too much fan service and not enough all original stuff, which is what made Final Fantasy famous in the first place, really. So that's Final Fantasy Explorers. It feels like an ideal commute game and quite easy to approach, but you need to know what you're getting into before you go for it. It's not quite Final Fantasy, and it's not quite Monster Hunter either, but what's there, I think, is really enjoyable as long as you can accept exactly where it's coming from. With the caveats in mind, it's an easy recommendation.